Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501 carrying 156 passengers is cruising high above the Java Sea when the aircraft suddenly begins rolling sharply to the left. It's not stable and it's not corrected. The aircraft seems to have taken on a life of its own, climbing higher, and higher while the pilots struggle to regain control. Then, inexplicably, they start to lose altitude. The aircraft is plummeting from the sky, speeding toward the Java Sea below. It seems the pilots cannot do anything to save their aircraft. This story is about human error, training deficiencies, and miscommunication. This is the story of Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501. 3 days earlier, on Christmas Day, December 25, 2014, a passenger flight was set to depart from Surabaya. Its destination was Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. The aircraft for this flight was an Airbus A320. It was 6 years old and had accumulated approximately 23,000 flight hours. During pushback and after both engines had started, an unexpected message was displayed on the ECM. The captain returned the aircraft to the parking bay and reported the issue to maintenance. An engineer came to the cockpit to check and help the pilots diagnose the problem. After consulting the troubleshooting manual, the engineer reset the circuit breakers for flight augmentation computers 1 and 2 and conducted a built-in test, which resolved the problem. The flight augmentation computer on an Airbus aircraft controls inputs to the rudder trim, and yaw damper, all of which are crucial for aircraft stability. The captain and the engineer engaged in a discussion. The captain asked whether he could perform the same reset action whenever the problem reappeared. The engineer stated that the pilot may reset whenever instructed on the ECM. The aircraft was then ready for departure. During pushback, and after starting engine 2, the message reappeared on the ECM. The pilots performed the ECM action. However, the problem still existed. The engineer who had performed the initial rectification saw that the aircraft did not move. He took over the interphone and communicated with the pilots. The captain asked the engineer if he could reset the system by pulling the FAC circuit breakers. The engineer confirmed that they could proceed with this action. However, after the co-pilot reset the circuit breakers, the problem still persisted, leading the engineer to advise the pilots to return the aircraft to the gate, disembark the passengers, and wait in the terminal building since the rectification might take a long time. The engineer consulted the troubleshooting manual, which recommended replacing flight augmentation computer 2. Upon realizing that no spare was available at the Surabaya maintenance store, the engineer obtained a replacement from another aircraft undergoing maintenance. After installing the new FAC2, the engineer requested the pilots to start both engines to verify functionality following the power interruption. After both engines started, the problem did not reappear. The captain was satisfied with the rectification and advised that they were ready to depart. The aircraft then flew from Surabaya to Kuala Lumpur and returned without further problems. The engineer didn't realize then that the problem wasn't with flight augmentation computer 2, but with the rudder travel limiter, specifically involving its circuit boards. These boards showed soldering cracks that could disrupt electrical continuity, leading to failures in the rudder travel limiter unit or RTLU. These cracks likely resulted from thermal cycling associated with changes between powered and non-powered conditions and transitions between ground and flight states. This loss of electrical continuity was the actual cause of the RTLU failure. Despite the engineer's efforts and the replacement of flight augmentation computer 2, the underlying issue with the rudder travel limiter went unresolved, setting the stage for potential catastrophic consequences. On December 28th, 156 passengers boarded Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501 at Juanda International Airport in Surabaya, Indonesia. The same Airbus A320 on which flight augmentation computer 2 had been replaced 3 days prior was piloted by the same captain, though accompanied by a different first officer. This time, the captain was 53-year-old Irianto, an Indonesian national. He began his aviation career in the Indonesian Air Force at a young age and spent a decade piloting F-5 and F-16 fighter jets. Following his military service and early retirement, he transitioned to commercial aviation. He had over 20,000 flying hours. Alongside him was 46-year-old First Officer Remy Emmanuel Plezel. He had more than 2,000 flying hours. In this flight, the first officer acted as the pilot flying, and the captain acted as the pilot monitoring. Before departure, the pilots reviewed the weather and their route. Flight 8501 was scheduled to travel from Surabaya, Indonesia, to Singapore Changi Airport, crossing the Java Sea along the route. This journey typically takes about 2.5 hours. They noted thunderstorms and areas of towering cumulonimbus clouds along the route, with cloud tops ranging from 24,000 feet to 44,000 feet. Prevailing westerly winds were blowing at 15 to 20 knots, and temperatures at cruising altitude ranged from -56 degrees to -62 degrees Celsius. Flight 8501 was ready for takeoff. After receiving clearance, the aircraft was pushed back from the gate and made its way to the takeoff runway. A few moments later, at 5:35 a.m. local time, the aircraft took off, beginning its climb to cruising altitude. Just 14 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft had climbed to its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, known as Flight Level 320, ready for its journey across the Java Sea. Before departure, the pilots reviewed the weather and their route. Flight 8501 was scheduled to travel from Surabaya, Indonesia, to Singapore Changi Airport, crossing the Java Sea along the route. This journey typically takes about 2.5 hours. They noted thunderstorms and areas of towering cumulonimbus clouds along the route, with cloud tops ranging from 24,000 feet to 44,000 feet. Prevailing westerly winds were blowing at 15 to 20 knots, and temperatures at cruising altitude ranged from -56 degrees to -62 degrees Celsius. Flight 8501 was ready for takeoff. After receiving clearance, the aircraft was pushed back from the gate and made its way to the takeoff runway. A few moments later, at 5:35 a.m. local time, the aircraft took off, beginning its climb to cruising altitude. Just 14 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft had climbed to its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, known as Flight Level 320, ready for its journey across the Java Sea. Due to the towering clouds in the area and the outside temperature of -62 degrees Celsius, the first officer activated the aircraft's anti-ice system to prevent the formation of ice on the wings and engines, which can affect performance and safety. At the same time, the flight attendant announced to the passengers to return to their seats and fasten their seat belts due to the weather conditions and the possibility of turbulence. Barely 30 minutes into the flight, while cruising at 32,000 feet, the master caution light was triggered, accompanied by an advisory message on the ECM. The captain recognized this alert because he had encountered it multiple times 3 days earlier. However, this time it didn't occur during taxi. It occurred in flight, high above the Java Sea. The first officer read and performed the ECM action to set both flight augmentation computer push buttons to off and then to on. Both rudder travel limiter units returned to normal function. Normally, a rudder travel limiter is a critical safety device in an aircraft that restricts the maximum movement of the rudder. The rudder is a primary control surface located at the tail and helps control yaw. At lower speeds, the rudder travel limiter allows greater rudder movement for sharper turns. At higher speeds, it restricts rudder deflection that could compromise the aircraft's structural integrity and stability. With the fault resolved, the crew's attention shifted from the ECM to the onboard weather radar. They noticed a large storm looming ahead. The captain requested a deviation of 15 miles to the left of track to avoid the weather, which was approved. The aircraft then altered its course to a heading of 310 degrees. Thunderstorms pose the most significant risk to aircraft among all weather conditions. They often contain hail, heavy rainfall, lightning, ice, strong winds, and supercooled water droplets that can potentially damage an aircraft. Under extreme circumstances, pilots make every effort to steer clear of thunderstorms whenever possible to ensure flight safety. Shortly after, a second failure occurred on both rudder travel limiter units, signaled by a chime and the master caution light. Again, the same message appeared on the ECM. The pilots promptly repeated the ECM action and both units resumed normal function. The pilots then contacted Jakarta Air Traffic Control, informing them that the flight had turned left off its planned route to avoid the bad weather. This update was acknowledged and tracked on the controller's radar. The controller then instructed the pilots to report once they had cleared the weather. Shortly afterward, the pilots requested to climb to 38,000 feet if possible, and they were told to stand by. Unfortunately, this was their final radio communication. Once again, a single chime sounded along with an ECM message. This marked the third failure of both rudder travel limiter units during this flight. Following the ECM procedures, the pilots acted, and the system returned to normal function. But 2 minutes later, the master caution light illuminated again, and the same message appeared. This was the fourth occurrence, and the captain wondered what else he could do. Instead of repeating the same action for the fourth time, which seemed pointless, something came to his mind. The captain had seen the engineer reset the FAC circuit breakers on the ground to eliminate this problem. He had even asked the engineer whether he could perform the same reset whenever the problem reappeared. But this time, they weren't on the ground with maintenance support. They were flying high above the Java Sea in the Airbus A320. The Quick Reference Handbook, in the section titled Computer Reset, states that in flight, the crew must restrict computer resets to those listed in the table. Before acting on other computers, the crew must fully consider the consequences. Having witnessed and performed flight augmentation computer circuit breaker resets before, the captain might have believed he understood the consequences. However, the FAC circuit breakers were not listed in the Quick Reference Handbook, and Airbus documents did not describe what resetting them in flight could cause. The crew should have evaluated the risks and formed an action plan, as required in emergency coordination procedures. However, the captain deviated from protocol, and just 54 seconds after the fourth master caution warning appeared, he reset the circuit breakers, an action he would soon regret. Immediately after resetting them, the fifth master caution warning sounded in the cockpit, accompanied by multiple notifications on the ECM. Resetting the circuit breakers caused an electrical interruption that disengaged the autopilot and auto-thrust systems, and the flight control logic switched from normal law to alternate law. This meant the aircraft lost several computerized protections designed to keep it within safe operational limits. In addition, the rudder deflected 2 degrees to the left, causing the aircraft to roll to a 54 degrees angle of bank. This roll rate was twice as fast as normal. Because many ECM messages appeared after the autopilot disconnected, the pilots did not notice the roll movement as they were distracted. It wasn't until 9 seconds later that the first officer took control using the right side stick. His initial response was to pull the stick backward and then to the right, reaching maximum deflection. This action reduced the aircraft's roll angle to 9 degrees left. The sudden rolling movement to the right might have caused an excessive sensation of rolling too far to the right. The captain's commands to pull down conflicted with the first officer's pitch-up inputs. Both side sticks were active simultaneously, sending combined signals to the flight computers. The aircraft reached 38,000 feet with a roll angle of 104 degrees left, then began plummeting at 20,000 feet per minute. Stall warnings activated, but the pilots couldn't recover. Bad weather and lack of a visible horizon compounded the situation. Both pilots tried to save the aircraft until impact. At 6:20 a.m., Flight 8501 crashed into the Java Sea, disintegrating on impact. All 162 people on board died. Search operations recovered major debris, including fuselage sections, the vertical stabilizer, rudder, wings, landing gear, and smaller interior components. 116 bodies were recovered. 46 remained missing. The investigation concluded that the soldering cracks in the rudder travel limiter units caused repeated ECM warnings. Resetting the FAC circuit breakers in flight caused autopilot disengagement, transition to alternate law, and uncontrolled rudder deflection. Combined with pilot input under alternate law, the aircraft entered an unrecoverable stall. The crew had never been trained for such extreme conditions, resulting in the tragic crash.